Good morning, everybody. Good morning, and welcome to the original Loretta Brown Show radio to open the heart, heal the soul, and awaken the consciousness. Benny.
Yes, ma'am.
What's happening?
Not a whole lot. I was expecting you to kind of come in doing one of these for today's show,
I feel like I should.
I mean, it all works. It all goes in the same.
It feels kind of fun to do that.
Of course.
Yeah, flying in today. I have a great guest. We're going to have a wonderful, wonderful show. You definitely want to tune in. And then here we are. We're in October. It's getting crispy out there. We've got beautiful big maple leaves. And I love it when they change their colors. I was out yesterday and the red was so red. It was like craziness.
I feel like this year it changed fast. Usually it's kind of like a blend in from season to season, but within a week. Well, I've been so busy with my house getting it on the market. Maybe that's probably why I wasn't paying attention to it. Yes.
You're selling your house?
Yeah, that was last week. Did you not listen? You weren't listening.
I did, but
I'm just kidding. That's okay. No, it finally went on the market last Friday. Friday, and I got my first full offer that Sunday. So 2 days.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Market's still good.
Yeah, the market is still good, and it's good to know that. Yeah, so
not worried.
You're right on time for all this astrology, these changes.
I know. I've been listening to you. That's why.
I know. I got all excited when you said that. I went, oh, it's perfect timing.
Feed me. Bring me more.
Okay, I'll bring it today. I'll just kind of spread it over there.
Perfect.
Anyway, I'm Loretta Brown, and I'm the owner of Reiki Oasis, located right here in the greater Seattle area for, I don't know, somewhere between 27, 28 years we've been around, and you can find more at ReikiOasis.com. I have my wonderful monthly class for women. Woohoo! The Temple of the Divine Feminine. Da, 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 da. Right? Thanks. It's so perfect. Anyway, we're going to have a great time on Saturday, so you can join me and you can sign up for everything that's scheduled at ReikiOasis.com. A big shout out to my listeners who help support the show. Blessings, 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 love, love, love. And you are a part of this. When you contribute anything, your energy becomes a part of it. So, as I mentioned last week, October is a big month astrologically, the best month in the world for Mr. Benny Mathers to sell his home. Oh, yeah.
Why, thank you.
I wrote that into the show.
I bet you
I knew. Yeah. Anyway, this past weekend, finally, I should say last week, finally, Mercury started to unjam those 6 planets retrograde and it went forward, although it still feels like it's backwards. I don't know what's going on with communication. It's a little weird. And the Wi-Fi's and the phones and everything, technology, the cars, keep exhaling, it'll get better. We did have Pluto go direct, and it has been retrograde since April 29th. Pluto is the planet of death and rebirth. So it emerges from this chapter, and we may be able to see with greater clarity all the ways we've transformed, all the endings that have come to us. And how important these endings can be for us to move forward. Yeah, it happens that way. I've got to interject it. If it comes, it comes. I was going to ask my guest this question. She can ponder it while I give the rest of my astrology report. But she's going to be talking about the Camino de Santiago and the way of the wild goose. We'll get more into that. But this idea that life gives you these challenges before it gives you its gifts. And for me, it's like it's got to go do some cleaning out. It's got to do some death before there's room for that life. So we'll throw that in. The Aries full moon last Saturday. Wow. It was in Aries. And, it's been smoky here. But so when you looked up at the moon, it looked like it was red orange, like it was fire. And I just looked at that and went, oh dear, watch out, Aries is in the room in full force. And it brought in alchemical fire to help us finally move ahead. Lots of people have been feeling really stuck and sludgy, and they're like, oh my goodness, Loretta, are we ever going to get forward? And I go, well, get ready, put your tinfoil hat on, because here we go. And sometimes we can be obsessed with healing and lose sight of our journey. We just get into it. And the feelings of calm that we're actually trying to create will be all riled up in that healing. And when this happens, we may need to release control or expectations of how we anticipate the healing to play out. The divine has her way with us. So make it through that. Release what you can, stand in the alchemical fire of change, and move forward, even if you're quaking or quacking. No, sorry, it had to happen. And as Jupiter's been hanging out close to the moon, emotions may have been running high. I'm sorry, it's Loretta's. Anyway, I'm not actually an astrologer. Yeah, never mind. On Monday, we had the 1010 portal, and once again, that's more of this pushing us forward, this beautiful, powerful energy of change. And with Jupiter right there, Jupiter expands everything. It amplifies everything. It makes us look at everything. So it's sometimes considered the lucky star. So remember that that movement, once again, is trying to get us into a good place. Each of us is hopefully learning to master the ego and tune into greater vision. And it's sticky. On October 16 through 18, which is coming up in a few days, we pass through the Arcturus Gateway, where the sun aligns with the superstar Arcturus. Arcturus allows high frequency energies to beam down to the planet. Arcturus is a star associated with Mr. Benny, prosperity, abundance, woohoo,
Loving it, feeling it.
I know, and increased psychic energies, intuition, our internal guidance system that brings us home. And Arcturus is believed to be the home of an advanced, loving, compassionate alien race. Arcturus is about 25 times bigger than our sun and is located north of the celestial equator. As it was so bright and shiny and is so bright and shiny, it captured the attention of our ancient ancestors, and myths and legends say they used it as a guiding star for those making a long journey over the seas. Oh my goodness, that's so appropriate to my guest. It's blowing me away. In Western astrology, Arcturus is believed to be a lucky star that carries the energy of prosperity and determination. And it indicates that if we work hard and we're fair and honest in our pursuits, we will be justly rewarded. And in Vedic astrology, Arcturus is known as Sawati, which means very beneficent. It's also believed there are Arcturian starseeds on Earth, which are those that descended from Arcturus and feel a strong connection to the star or the stars. And I love the stars. I hope everyone loves the stars. And speaking of stars and following stars and all my silliness, my guest today is the amazing Beebe Bahrami. And Beebe is an anthropologist and an award-winning author of several books, at least 7, maybe 8 now, I don't know, and travel guides to include the book we're going to talk about today, The Way of the Wild Goose, 3 pilgrimages following geese, stars, and hunches on the Camino de Santiago, a beautiful and unusual pilgrimage turned adventure story in pursuit of a pagan mystery on the Camino de Santiago across France and Spain. Why is the goose associated with the medieval Camino de Santiago, and how did it come to preserve a whole universe of pagan, pre-Christian lore in one innocent symbol? Longtime trekker Bahrami decided to find out and unknowingly catapulted herself into a true wild goose chase, unearthing a magnetically alive and meaningful long walk on the ancient roads of France and Spain and a journey into the self. Oh my goodness, thank you and welcome to the show, Beebe.
Thank you so much, Loretta, for having me. It's a huge honor to be here. And I feel like the stars have aligned for today's conversation.
I got to tell you, I put this stuff together and then I'm reading it and I'm looking at you and I went, I can't make this up. It's all part of what happens, isn't it? And
it is.
Yeah, and I was also telling Beebe, excuse me, I've got to clear my throat. I was that before the show that I've been out walking, and we have Canadian geese that migrate through this region, and so appropriately, I hear them and look up, and there's a bunch of them in a V coming right over my head, coming down to land in this marshy region near where I live, and I went, oh my goodness, we are on time, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out where to plunge into this absolutely delicious conversation with you. Beebe, maybe let's begin with the Camino. What drew you to it and when?
I first heard about the Camino in 1986 when I was a college exchange student at the University of Seville in southern Spain. And I was sitting in the front row as I did so I could see the lips of my professor move because I was still struggling to learn fluent Castilian. And it was the history of Spain course that I was taking. And he was pacing back and forth in the front of the room and smoking a cigarette as they did in those days in classrooms in Spain. And he said, today we're going to talk about the road that made Europe. And I was thinking, wow, that's a pretty big statement. And he said, it's called the Camino de Santiago. And as soon as he uttered those three words, before I even knew what it was, it just burned itself into my spirit. And I just thought, wow, whatever this is, I need to find out more. And I wrote those three words on my notebook right as he walked by and tapped ash onto the notebook. And I was circling the words. So there's this ash smear circle around the words, almost to make it even more, pay attention. And it took 9 years before I actually finally did get to a part of the Camino de Santiago. I actually went to Galicia and walked a portion of it, which is in northwestern Spain. And I went to Santiago de Compostela, which is the goal of this pilgrimage route that really is a network of many roads across all of Europe that eventually lead to 4 main roads in France or several main roads in Spain or in Portugal, and they're all destined towards that, I should be going this way, towards that northwestern point in Iberia, and where the purported tomb of St. James the Greater is buried. And it was pure magic from the moment I set foot on it. That was 1995. There wasn't as much marking or infrastructure, and yet people recognized me as a pilgrim, and they started, helping me, and I was absolutely unprepared for this walk, but people, opened their doors. They helped me find food, or they fed me, and people even opened their hotels that were closed, or just offered me a place to stay. And by the time I got to Santiago de Compostela, I had been initiated as a pilgrim. People called me a pilgrim, and I realized, my God, I'm a pilgrim. And being a pilgrim, I learned that first walk was trusting the unknown and having faith in life to give you what you need. So that's when I started really learning to trust more and to realize that there is this beautiful magic at work. It's real magic, but we have to open ourselves and trust it. And I was just very lucky that I met such kind, generous people. And then I just kept going back because there's just so many layers to this road. And I just kept wanting to peel back the next layer and the next layer and the next layer. And I still am, how many years later, 3 decades later, there's just so much there because it's a very ancient geography.
Wow. I love what you said so much. And also, there's obviously some strong connection between you, the Camino, and your writings, what it is that you came to do. By the way, you're just an excellent writer. And I just want to tell everybody right now, just get the book now.
I really am moved by that. Thank you.
Yeah, The Way of the Wild Goose. Wow. I love it. It's a metaphor. We're going to get deeper into what that means. When did you first meet the goose?
I first met the goose when I was walking the Camino Frances, which is the most historic route across northern Spain. And I started meeting a few, not many, but a few pilgrims, mostly European, mostly French and Spanish, who told me that they were walking the Camino, following signs and clues, and having total open faith that the right signs and clues and guidance would come to them. And I said, what is that about? And they said, well, one of them was actually studying with a spiritual teacher. Actually, his brother-in-law from Brazil was studying with a spiritual teacher in Switzerland, and he himself was from Germany. And his brother-in-law had gone through this spiritual initiation walk on the Camino, told his brother-in-law, you've got to walk this, you've got to do it the way I did it, and he had this little booklet in his pocket, and I think it was handwritten, and it had come from the spiritual teacher in Switzerland, and he was walking this sacred walk, and I said, what kinds of signs, and he said, well, a lot of signs, some are personal and them, and some are universal, but even those universal ones have specific messages for you, and I said, well, can you give me an example? And he said, well, the footprint of the goose, that three-pronged footprint. And I just thought, well, that's just wacky. But then I kept meeting people. And then I found that there's this whole literature, especially in French and in Spanish, that speaks about following the way of the goose and following the footprints of the goose and the symbolism of the goose, specifically on this particular pilgrimage, the Camino de Santiago. And then I started discovering that it's not just the Camino de Santiago, but the geographies, especially in southwestern France and northern Spain, that the main Camino routes pass through, are rich in folklore that involve geese, ducks, and swans. And they also connect them to goddesses. And that later, with the greater rise of Christianity and Christianity putting roots in these areas, those goddesses became fairies. But
Yes.
a lot of them had bird feet, and those bird feet were almost always waterfowl feet. And then I started finding very specific female divinities with goose, duck, and mostly goose and duck feet, sometimes swan or swan cloaks like Freya. But especially in southwestern France, there's La Reine Pédoc, which in Occitan, the old Romance language that's related to Latin of the south of France and really of regions in northern Spain and into parts of western Italy, means the goose-footed queen. So I started finding very specific queens with goose feet, and they were divinities. They were associated with wisdom. They were associated with preserving justice and balance and health of the wild world as well as of human affairs. And in the folklore where these waterfowl-footed women appeared in northern Spain, they were almost always testing mortals on their morality and their ethics. And if they did any harm to the earth or to humanity, there were consequences. And if they did good things to sustain and honor the earth and human society, they were rewarded. So I just became intrigued that I'm stumbling into what I feel is an indigenous folklore of Europe, really, because you find these bird-footed women across Europe.
I'm sorry, this keeps happening. I have goosebumps.
And you go on a wild goose chase, and
while you're talking, because I have been on the trail of the divine feminine for years and years and years, and most of the time I go to Egypt. I have been to France, and I'm drawn in that different direction. Years ago I was doing some sacred work, and I actually had a dream, and in the dream, you'll love this. I'm trying to get all dressed up for something, and I need to get my red high heels on, but I have the feet of a bird, and I can't figure out how to get my feet into the shoes. And it led me on a Googling of the goddesses with the bird feet.
Oh, that's a powerful dream.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's something deep in our psyche that definitely, and you've
Yeah.
That's your walk in life. That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah. So I keep my shoes on when I want to stay hidden. Right. But there's something so powerful in this. The bird feet, the ancient Mesopotamian goddesses, Inanna and things like that, they had feet of birds. But we're talking about webbed feet. And
Right.
oh, wow. I'm sorry, I'll say it, the great mysteries that are being right in front of us, but hidden in a very magical way. So you follow the signs and the symbols.
Yes,
Yeah.
when I really realized that I couldn't stop looking into this, it really had captured my spirit, my intellect, and me physically. I wanted to get out on the Camino more and look for these signs and clues. And and I already had immersed myself in all the folklore and the literature on them. And the book is really about 3 dedicated pilgrimages, one in France and 2 that traverse, the border of France, the Pyrenees into Spain, looking for all the signs, in archaeology, in engravings in medieval churches, in, what modern pilgrims are also engaging on the route. So I found a lot in Romanesque architecture, the dominant church style on the Camino that is from the 11th and 12th century, really at the height and heyday of the medieval pilgrimage when it was at its most popular. And then I also started finding some archaeology that predated the Christian period that also involved these goose feet and duck feet. And one of the things about the modern Camino that's pulling something old, and we don't know how old it is the game of the goose, which is a children's game popular in Europe. It's like our snakes and ladders. It's a game of chance. You throw a pair of dice and you move your piece on a board game that's often in the form of a spiral, like a coiling snake. And it has 63 squares. And the 63rd square is the winning square. On these 63 squares, 13 of the squares are taken by geese, and they're lucky squares. So there's this association with luck. There's also association with guidance and guardianship, which are all things associated with geese in the ancient world across Eurasia, as well as into Africa and in Egypt. The ancient Egyptians have a lot of geese on their paintings. Do. And so I just, so the game of the goose came into it. And what really nailed it for me is when you walk on the Camino Frances, the most historic route of the Camino across northern Spain, and you enter La Rioja and go to Logroño, the capital city of La Rioja and the center of great wine. On the Camino, right in the middle of the city, is this big square called the Plaza de Santiago, but everyone calls it more locally the Plaza del Juego de la Oca, the game of the goose square, because inlaid in the square at a huge human the goose. So you can use your own body as a game piece, and there are the 63 squares. And I just thought, whoa, this is not my imagination. The Camino, the game of the goose, geese, they're all being associated. And I started digging more deeply and found that there's rich lore about how the game of the goose is a metaphor for the Camino, and the Camino is a metaphor for life. And we go through ordeals, and we have, it's almost like you always have to go through an ordeal before you gain the gift. And that was something that both playing the game teaches, but so does walking the Camino, that no matter what you go through on a day on the Camino, it always ends well. There's some grace or some gift comes through it. Or if it's not through the day, if it's whatever ordeal, however long it takes, there's a lesson and a gift and a strength that comes from it.
I love that. I did do a little bit of looking at the game of the goose, right? And you explain it very beautifully in the book how this thing works. And it occurred to me that yes, our life, we are in the game of the goose. It's happening. And then somewhere along the line, I realized you had actually written your book as the game of the goose and showing us, your movement through the game by going on these pilgrimages. You also point out near the end of the book, and I don't know, I remember who it was that had likened the game to the 7 layers, the chakras, and also the 3 sections of the body, the mind, and the soul, right? And,
that was really the aha moment. The deep epiphany was, it was actually a parish priest in Logroño who had written a manuscript and had studied this deeply. And the inlaid Game of the Goose on the square there is based off of his designs. And he drew a lot of different designs, and he went with that particular design. It's not a coiled spiral like a labyrinth, a classic labyrinth. It's more, you enter here and you go on one layer and then you go up to the second layer. So it weaves back and forth. It's like a shimmying back and forth serpent, and then it ends at 63. And he did that because he said, you have to first think about why 63 squares.
Yes.
And so it's like, okay, 7 times 9. And he said, okay, 9 is the sacred number in a lot of systems. But for him, he pulled out the 9 days that the Mother Earth, Demeter, went searching for her daughter Persephone after she was taken into the underground, into the underworld. And so he saw it as a full cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. And then 7, he said, is just, you find it in every sacred system having to do with the process, the levels of the spirit's growth and initiation and ascension. So he created this game board, square, inlaid in the plaza design, where you enter and you walk the first chakra, or the first level of initiation. And he said, when you organize the Game of the Goose this way, you enter, and on the game board, it's always every 4th and every 5th alternating square is a goose. So you arrive at the 5th square in the first level, and there's a goose right in the middle of the first level. And then you go and you rise up to the second level, and there's a goose waiting to greet you. And then in the middle, she's there to guide you and meet you in the middle. And then you go up to the 3rd, and there she is at the 3rd level. So he said the goose is a guardian and guide to this process of spiritual initiation. And you're going up the chakras, or you're going up the tree of life, and the sephirot. And you can also think of the 7 sacraments in the Catholic tradition, which was his tradition. And sadly, he died, I believe, in 2016. And before I had a chance to meet him. But the generosity of a fellow writer and pilgrim and Camino nerd, he shared his copy of the manuscript that he had acquired when he was in Logroño with me, and that was gave me a chance to really steep myself in Father Ojeda's work. And that was profound, because I thought, here is a Catholic parish priest building this body of knowledge on universal sacred traditions and weaving it into his own, and basically telling people the Camino and the Game of the Goose and life is all a spiritual walk, and you can awaken to it and ascend the layers and arrive at the winning square. And it may not be easy, but boy, does really cool stuff happen if you walk on this path and wake up.
I love that so much. I've always thought and discovered that I'll say the ancient mysteries are actually hidden right in front of us and have been woven into all kinds of things. So I was thinking when you were talking that recently we just got done with the 9 days of Navratri, which are the celebration of the goddess in the East Indian format, right? And so, yeah, here we are. Also, I want to say this, and then we're going to take a little station break. You also point out in the book that if people are familiar with the game Chutes and Ladders, right, that it'll give you a little bit of insight into the Game of the Goose if you've never actually, if you're not familiar with it. And apparently you can actually buy the Game of the Goose.
You can. You can.
But I think living it is much more exciting. Anyway, so this is Loretta Brown. We're going to take a little station break. My guest today, Beebe Bahrami, The Way of the Wild Goose, and three pilgrimages following geese, stars, and hunches on the Camino de Santiago. And we'll take a station break. We'll be right back.
All right, all clear, ladies, and still live on the old YouTube.
I love this so much. I just, I went, the Camino has sometimes called to me, and I'm like, maybe that's what I need to do next year, get out there and take care of the COVID-19 pounds and get ready for a nice walk, right? Yeah.
Oh, that's a wonderful idea. And there's this lore and really lived experience on the Camino that when the Camino enters your consciousness and starts to embed itself into you, like 1986 for me, it's like it's the call. The Camino has made its call to you, and no matter it's hard at times because you think, well, when am I going to get the time and the money, or to have everything taken care of at home so that I can go on this pilgrimage, which is a very old problem for pilgrims. That was what they really had to deal with, to go to a sacred site. It was a life transformative moment that they really were leaving home, and they did have to have all their affairs in place and taken care of, and have the resources and the time. And so it's hard, once the call comes, it's like, well, but now when am I going to walk it? But there's this experience that so many pilgrims talk about that it still happens. It's like the Camino has made its call. It wants you on it, but it wants you at the right time. And so for me, the first walk took 9 years, 9 years more than I wanted to wait to walk but it wound up being perfect. And so it's like this trusting of, if it's in your mind, you want to walk the Camino, the right time and circumstances will arrive to get you there. And it's like you're in this relationship now with the Camino.
Yeah.
And it'll orchestrate it.
Yeah. I actually feel it. I know you wrote you have a travel guide for it, right?
I do. I do. Yeah, actually it's right here.
Show it. Yeah.
On demand.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay, so I'll get that.
Yeah.
And I'll
ready to
sit
come
with
back
it.
too?
Yeah. I'm ready.
Stand by.
Anytime. Welcome back to the original Loretta Brown Show with my guest, Beebe Bahrami, The Way of the Wild Goose Chase. No, sorry, Wild Goose. Anyway, I want to remind everybody that these shows are archived. You can listen to them over and over again at the KKNW 1150 archives for the original Loretta Brown Show. And we're also on iTunes, Podcast One, Spotify, and I don't know, we're all over the place. And so check it out. Lots and lots of great shows. But I just love this conversation with you so much. The game of the goose, which is really the way of life, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the way of life. I was also thinking of something else when you were talking. The Egyptian pyramids are lined up supposedly with the belt of Orion, but there's another line of thought that relates them to Cygnus, the astrological sign of the swan.
Right.
In
the Milky Way. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. That's definitely. I mean, not only is there lore that may go back to the Middle Ages of pilgrims following the way of the wild goose as they make their way into southwestern France and over across into northern Spain, because they're migratory animals, and people were much more in touch with natural rhythms, and they lived much more in nature. I mean, they had to grow all their food, and so you have to know nature and its seasons and its cycles. And so people were very tuned to a lot of natural patterns, including the flight of migratory birds, and especially geese. I mean, even Aldo Leopold in the Sand Country Almanac, the naturalist, writes about how spring really arrives when the geese decide to make their migration south. They've they've made a commitment. That he writes that the red cardinal can sing a spring song and then suddenly say, "Oh, it's too cold," and go back into winter mode. Whereas once geese commit, they're already 200 miles away from home, So, and that's very much the way pilgrims are. It's like once you commit, you're no longer, you're on the road. Going back isn't really an option until you get to where you want to go. And they used to follow the migratory patterns of geese, which is a northeast to southwest flight across Europe from Scandinavia to the southwestern point of Iberia. But at night they would use the stars to navigate, and so it's also called the way of the Milky Way, the path of the Milky Way. And so pilgrims also followed the stars. And in the Milky Way, there is the constellation of Cygnus, which, if I remember correctly, is at the point where the Milky Way has this branching point. And in a lot of lore, not just in the old world, but in North America, and I'm sure in South America, there is this lore of Cygnus being the guardian at the gate of where the souls are going after somebody dies. They need to go to Cygnus and pass through that gate to successfully get to the land of the souls, or the hereafter. And so so I love it. There we have again waterfowl.
And I wanted to ask you, I want to create more of a connection between the goose and the goddess. And why are goddesses associated with water and animals and things like that? And I think you might have mentioned Mother Goose a little bit ago, but I want to bring her back in.
Yes. Mother Goose is a later incarnation of the goose goddess, as I call her, one that was striving to survive during much more pronounced patriarchal systems taking hold in Europe. But going back to why goddesses and geese and water, it just when we really go back and look at our prehistory and the first indications of sacred art, whether it's that mobile art of the ivory carvings from the Upper Paleolithic, or what the paintings on cave walls that depict forms that we recognize, there's this strong association with animals or hybrid animals, this merging of the human and the animal world, and it speaks to the very strong possibility that our earliest sacred life and systems and practices had to be earth-based, because there was no way of denying it. That's where we come from. And we were living so much in nature as nomadic, semi-nomadic, hunter-gatherers, early agriculturalists. All of this is earth-based. And so there's just no way people could deny that the earth is a rich, fertile, holy place, and we come from it. We saw evidence of it every day, including our own birth, or the birth of our own, tribe or people. And so that's probably where it comes from. And the earliest depictions of divinity were most likely animals. And then we start seeing there's this theory that, as we started, moving more towards settled life and permanent settlements, that our image of God started shifting to a more man-made image. But before that really set into place, we had animals as divine, or hybrid beings, half human, half animal, as divine. And I think that's where this comes from. And we have a lot of hybrid divinities, of both expressing masculine divinity and feminine divinity. It's possible that why geese and water, and we have to add snakes into this too, because the symbolism of snakes and geese seems to really be parallel or wedded in a lot of belief systems and folklore. And why these two, and why are they two of the most, among the most depicted animals in sacred art, ancient sacred art? It's probably because they share a lot of things in common that speak to the magical cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. You have geese who migrate, you have snakes who hibernate, you have geese who what do they call it? I just had it on the tip of my tongue. When they molt. They molt their feathers. Snakes shed their skin. They both disappear at a certain season and reappear at another season. They both lay eggs, so they show their fertility very blatantly. We mammals wait, gestation period before we start showing our fertility and bulging. And so their fertility, they put it right out there, and the egg is probably one of the most profound symbols of fertility and procreation. And these are also two creatures who have mastered, in a shamanic thinking, the lower, middle, and upper worlds. Yeah. They can move through all of them. And so there's a lot going on there that would associate them with an ancient, perhaps our first most primordial prehistoric creator, who a lot of scholars think was most likely female, and if not female, androgynous, before we split and created this polarity.
So there's so much, the masculine, the feminine, the energies of the land, which we haven't really touched on, the gematria. All of this is here. I've been to France and it's magical. There's something going on in that country. I would like for you to share from your book. There's so many wonderful things, but you have a place in the book where you visit a church that's very feminine. I think it's a church with 100 doors or something. And then after that, you have an experience with a masculine church, which has got a caretaker there or something. Could you just share all of that?
Thanks. I love that you asked about that, because that was another thing that, the locals really initiated me to this fact that I'm not imagining all this. This is in the land, and it's in the local cultures and the local caretakers of the churches and the villagers who greet and take care of pilgrims on their path. And well, it's the Church of Santa Maria de Eunate, Eunate, and it's in Navarra. And Eunate in Basque means 100 doors. And so that is already cool in and of itself. But when you arrive at this church, it's in the middle of the countryside. It's not associated with any village, though it's within walking distance of two villages. It's an octagonal church, so 8-sided. And most medieval churches that had cloisters would have these square cloisters off to the side of the church, and you would enter the cloister through a doorway inside the church. This church has a cloister surrounding it, so it's a ring, like the rings of Saturn, around the church. And the cloister itself has 33 arches. So it's been enigmatic, and a lot of people have pondered, why 33, and I started thinking, well, 33 is the number of beads in the rosary for the Muslims pray. It's not just that. I mean, there are Christian traditions that also have 33, because that's the age that it's believed Christ was crucified. So 33 is important for both these traditions, and also not only in the mystical Islamic tradition of Sufism, but also in the Anglican tradition. There is this tradition of meditating on the 99 names or characteristics, attributes of God. And when you get to the 99th, you take the next step and you enter the 100th. You rub the 100th bead, or you go around the circuit 3 times, and then you touch that larger bead, and you wear there's the amulet hanging at the end of the rosary. That's the 100th bead, or the 100th door. And so I realized, what if there was this medieval multi-faith tradition going on at this church, where you meditated on the 99 attributes or names of God, and then you entered the chapel, the 100th door. And adding to that, who is inside this chapel but Mary? It's named after her, Saint Mary of the 100 Doors. So then I thought about the Latin term in the Middle Ages for Mary, which was the hortus conclusus, the interior garden, the hidden garden. And I thought, a cloister is always around a garden. And this cloister is around this most sacred garden, Mary. And she is who you meet at the 100th door. So it just felt like there was this beautiful multi-faith system saying, do this meditation, and on the 100th story, you enter in communion with the divine. So it's it's a feminine church because it is devoted to Mary. That all was pretty darn cool to start piecing all those things together. But then when you walk from there and you go to Puente La Reina in Navarra, and then you get to Estella in Navarra, and then after Estella, the town of Estella, you reach after a couple stops, you reach Torres del Rio, a village. And Torres del Rio has another octagonal church. And I was lucky enough to meet the caretaker of that church one morning before I set off continuing on my walk. And she really, wanted me to sit and talk to her. And she was really upset. She was like this drill sergeant, and she was so upset with all these pilgrims walking by and not stopping to look at this church. Because this church, if you come inside and you look at the dome inside of that octagon, it's a replica of the prayer niche at the mosque in Cordoba, which is now converted into a cathedral. Not now, I mean, a few hundred years ago it was. Right. But it was, the mosque of Cordoba, that dome was probably built by stonemasons who were either Muslim or had been trained in the Islamic traditions. And there's a lot of examples of this also on the Camino, as well as examples of Jewish ideas that are then built into stone. So that's why there's this multi-faith tradition. It's not just the Christian, and nothing ever happens in a vacuum. They all draw from and influence each other. And there's also the pagan influences. So, and I go into a lot of that in my book, but so she was just so upset, just like, how can you not stop and see one of the gems of the Camino? And people weren't doing it because she was asking for a €1 donation for the upkeep of the church and for her time and trouble, and to pay for the pamphlets and for the electricity, and for her, she would give people a stamp in their pilgrim's credential, which is sometimes called a pilgrim's passport. And you get these stamps as you go along the way. And so when she realized I spoke Spanish, she says, "You come sit, I've decided you're not a tourist, you're a pilgrim, and you have time. You have nowhere you have to be right now." And she made me translate for all these people. Come on, people, pay the €1, come and see this church. Here's the history. And then she just suddenly turned to me sweetly and said, "Besides, I have things to tell you." And I just thought, wow, I think I just might have struck gold. And she just started, when there was a lull in people coming into the church, she said, "This church, it's no accident it was built here. It's no accident it was built in an octagon." And she said, those 8 pillars that join the walls that form the octagon are each channeling. And she gave a number of so many volts of energy pulled up from the earth, and they're just pulling it up. And then they move into the dome and they join, and it's 8-fold. And it's like a stupa, like a Buddhist stupa. That's this energy channel between heaven and earth. And then she started saying, people mock me because when I talk about energy, but come on, everything's energy. I mean, Einstein knew that energy and matter, they have this dance. And she said, and this church is very masculine, and it forms a complete circuit with the Church of Santa Maria de Eunate, which is feminine. And this is, they're the two ends of this moving circuit, the positive and the negative, and the yin yang. And I realized that in the middle of that is Estella, which also has an octagonal church. And Estella has this, it's almost like a merging of both the masculine and the feminine energy. So it's like in the middle of and I just, that was powerful to learn from a local, steeped in her own culture's lore and traditions. And it also really made me, again, realize, like the square in Logroño in the Game of the Goose, this is not my imagination. This is something very real happening on the ground.
Yeah, that is it's so beautiful. And if memory serves me right, she had you sing.
Oh, she
Is
did.
This the place where you sang? Yeah.
Yeah, and then she barked. She commanded that I sing. And I was like, I just don't want to fight with this woman. For one thing, I'm learning a lot from her. And I'm not a singer, but she still said sing, that's an excuse, and excuses. And so I just went and stood in the center of this octagon, and I sang a sacred song that I knew, a Gregorian chant, and it was astounding. It was like I had the voice of an angel.
Yeah.
And the energy just reverberated.
Yeah.
And just entered my cell tissue, and I could feel it in the walls and in the air. And these places, it just confirmed it's concentrating this energy. And as she said, it wasn't an accident that the church was built there. Stonemasons, it is known, they did have this lore of sacred geometry and of a sensing of the electromagnetic and the energy in the earth, the telluric forces, that they didn't just build places by accident in certain spots. They looked hard to find just the spot that seemed to have the right vibration.
Yeah.
And then they built sacred geometry on top of that to concentrate that energy.
Oh, we don't have time to delve as deep into that as I'd love to, but the fact that the ley lines and the churches and the temples, everything are built in very specific places, and the pillars are frequency oriented, and you sang there touched my heart so much. And I went, oh, your song is still going. It's still going. Right? Well,
I love thinking about that.
It's still going. Yeah. So there it is. It's blessing all that is. I'm jumping around only because I'm looking at the clock, which is unbelievable. I want you to talk about the Church of St. Faye, where you discovered the 26 ducks and the cover of your book. Right?
Yes. If readers look closely at the cover, they'll see the Romanesque church's archway that is framing the more modern Game of the Goose that the publisher beautifully designed. And that was another one of those moments of, oh goodness, here's another huge piece of evidence that, again, this isn't my imagination, but something real going on the ground. Morlas is this little village in the southwest of France. And it's on the Arles route, one of the four main routes of the roads in France. And I arrived there in the late afternoon, and I was just starting to explore that there's something, I really need to pay attention to goose and duck signs. And I was walking with a friend at that time, my friend Sarah, and she got to the village a little ahead of me. And she turned around when I entered the village and she said, I think you just won the duck and goose lottery. You've got to check out this archway. And sure enough, there's the fifth tier, I believe, on the Romanesque archway, which was carved in the 12th century, are 13 ducks going this way and 13 ducks going this way. And the two leading each group are kissing beaks. And it can't be an accident, 13, because that's the number of geese on the Game of the Goose. And there was a lot of ideas about why these ducks, why here Sainte Foy, which really means Saint Faith. And she was a local martyr in southwestern France in the 4th century. And a lot of churches are devoted to her in the southwest of France. She's, one of the apex miracle saints of the region. And she has her main church devoted to her with her remains is nearby in Conques, further north from here. Anyway, it was just, there's a lot of theories, but one of them is these were pilgrims, representing pilgrims, but also that they're representing the spiritual initiatory path that pilgrims were taking in the Middle Ages.
Yeah. So. Yeah. There's so much in that, I was thinking, number one, the ducks and the geese represent the pilgrims. Also, the goose represents the goddess or the divine feminine, right? There's that. But I was also thinking about 13 around 1, which is that sacred thing of like Christ with his 12 disciples, and there's many versions of that. But I also was thinking about the Kundalini energy and the 13 around 1, the 12 strands of DNA around the God strand. It's just the way Loretta thinks and how they kiss at the top. right?
There's definitely no accident that,
Yeah.
you know, this is another church devoted to a very holy female.
Yeah.
And if you were go to Barcelona, to the Gothic cathedral there, and to the cloister, you'll find that there are 13 living geese kept in the cloister there.
Yeah.
And that church is dedicated to Santa Eulalia, another martyr from Iberia, a female.
Yeah.
Who is
so we
honored.
I have to interrupt because we have like 30 seconds, which is craziness. So Beebe Bahrami, where do people find your book? Where do they find you?
They can find me on my website, just Beebe Bahrami. Google that and it'll take you right to my website, as well as my books, which are for sale in every venue that you prefer to buy your books.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to end quickly with something from your book where you're eating somewhere. It's toward the end of the book. And you said, if we could all live together like this, our world would be fine. And I knew in that moment that what I was experiencing was the whole point of Mother Goose, Mother Goddess. So go in peace. I loved having you on the show, Beebe Bahrami, and everybody out there. Oh my goodness, follow the way of the wild goose. Lots of love.
Thank you.